Welcome to the Uva Cordero Show. And this evening, we're going to be talking about some interesting concept in international affairs. This video is made as a recorded lecture for the uh, political economy class for international politics 120 level. And this week, we've been talking about international affairs from theoretical lenses. And one of the theories that we will be looking at today is an interesting one with the title The English School. The English School Theoretical Framework, which I want to share with you so you can understand how it's used and its usefulness. So stay with me in the course of the next 10 minutes or so. I will start with sharing my screen so you can follow the lecture alongside with me, even as we are talking about international the English school. And I find this very useful a framework because it is kind of interlinked with other theoretical frameworks that we've been talking about the last week. But it's kind of unique also in its way, and I'm going to get into it. It's called the English School because it emerges out of a bunch of scholars that have inclinations toward the United Kingdom or England, but some of the theoretical users of this theory who have studied and researched it, they don't have to be Englishmen. So you can be an English scholar even if you're not from England. But just to rephrase a little bit of it, is that in comparison to other uh, theoretical frameworks that we have discussed already, which is realism, which centers the state as a central actor in international affairs and assumes that the world is anarchic. That means there's an absence of central authority and that states are rational actors. They are likely to pursue their interest in a self-help system, which the international village, the international society is. And because this system is anarchic, and everybody is in pursuit of their interests, violence sort of becomes as like central to the operation of states at this level. So the realist claim is that war is inevitable and that states have to arm themselves and grow their capability militarily in order to fend off possible aggression and violation of their sovereignty. Therefore, it's the nature of the international system that generates conflict. In general, that's what the realists say. There are also differences between structural realist and classical realist, but I'm not going to get into that today because we're talking about something else. The second main theoretical framework, as we have discussed already, are the liberals. And the liberals are also called the idealists before. They used to be called the idealists, but the common term that many scholars use these days is the liberals. And a kind of family of theories that are divergent in their prescriptions. But in general, liberals think that the world, while anarchic, this international system, while anarchic, there's possibility of cooperation because of interdependence, and that some modes of cooperation includes trade or international institutions, and that human beings are by nature not necessarily uh, drawn to conflict as the first sense, as a gut reaction, but the conflict can be necessary when other higher ideals of humanity, sort of like genocide or aggressions, are triggered. So therefore, states can be violent, but they're not necessarily predisposed to violent because human nature is social and is perhaps for some liberals capable of doing more good than harm. And states are kind of constitutions of collective human aspirations. So Those are the two main frameworks in international affairs, and many theories use them. But now let's go into how the English scholars differ from this theoretical framework that I have listed. Now, for the English scholars, it's a society approach. They think about the international system as a society in which states are invited into based on their acceptance of international norms and cultures and values. And the way to think about it is to see the international society as a community of nations which can be divided between those who are aligned in terms of values and those who are misaligned in terms of values, or the continuous creation of multiple societies. Now, this theory is it meshes up some concepts of realisms that I've discussed in the last slide and some concepts of liberalism that I've also discussed. Now, it does suggest that the cooperative aspects of international relations do exist, even though the urges of conflicts are also present in human nature. So human beings are capable of cooperating, but they are also capable of unleashing violence within the systems of international societies that is a result of states or created by states. So according to the English scholars, there are three distinctive ways about thinking about international affairs. And the first one is called the international system. The second is international society. And the third is the world society. And all of these ways and means of thinking are related, but also different in several ways. And I'll get into it in the subsequent slides. Now, the international system, as we have talked in this class already, is a system that is one of anarchy, in which there is an absence of central authority. So the world has no president, the world has no police, the world has no fireman, and the world has nobody to call when there are problems. And states, 193 plus, are members of this international village without a head prefect. So power politics is an important constituent of international politics. In this village of states, many countries are angling for influence over the other. So the international English scholars do agree with realists in this position that anarchy is central, and therefore anarchy requires response, and increasing military capability is a necessary action to do because you can't trust anybody. Everybody is out to eat your lunch. It's like a bad neighborhood, and everybody has to protect themselves because there are bullies around. So what is the other thing they say? So in the international society, this kind of comes from a long tradition of liberal thinkers. One of them is this Dutch scholar called Grotius, who talked about free trade in the high seas as trade as emblematic to the pursuit of some other human aspirations that might not be necessarily attainable through violence. So every human society, every state desires to trade, and trade is governed by rational interest. So there's a possibility of rationality within a national state that could reduce the possibility of conflict. So this idea of an international society in which, although conflict is a part of it, but rationality is also a part of it, is important in how we think about the globe at large within the members of it. And it kind of comes from a combination of many other scholars, that classical scholars, most of them are European scholars who studied the state before, It's sort of like a Hobbesian analysis of the state of nature in combination with the idea of human being as rational actor from Hugo Grotius, and as well as the philosophy of Kant, who we have studied in liberalism, that the international human beings are able to adopt higher moral goals that are accepted uh, internationally as constituting a better world. Therefore, we have some higher ideals that we agree inalienable rights. It's kind of what Kant kind of aspires for, that rights of all human race all over the world. So that's the international society. It's a combination of those three ideas all working in tandem, and the nature of that society requires a different modality of thinking based on challenges that the states are confronting. Now, within the international society, there's kind of many kind of two kind of sets of ideas present within that society. One is pluralism, and the other is solidarity. Now, pluralism argues that this idea of international society that is accepted by all actors, all agents, is very thin, and states might be members of the international society, but differ on what they define as constituting the international society. So, within a pluralistic international system, ideas such as power balancing, diplomacy, and great power corporations are necessary to offer governance. Governance, not government. Whereas in solidarism or solidarity, the international, those who espouse these ideas think that there is maximum conception of what constitutes international society. That everybody agrees, that all human beings agree on certain principles, including the idea that genocides are bad, that human beings should not be subjected to genocide or ethnic cleansings, for example, and that aggressions or use of force that is unnecessary and provoked use of force by states are not great ways or great actions that should be celebrated, should be condoned, as well as that the international system, while made up by states, ultimately is a representation of higher collective aspirations of human beings. Therefore, any form of violence is not going to hurt the states, because states are made of human beings. It's going to hurt people, and mostly powerless people, often children, women, or people who are marginalized for one reason or the other. So justice should be a very important concept within the international society, and fairness is also important. Therefore, members of the village, of the international village, are asked to think about ways of enacting processes of justice, of peace and equality. So there's this debate that exists within conceptualization of international society as a framework. So you want to think, where do you think about the world? Is it a plural world in which there are multiplicities of what the international society means? Or do you think about a solidarity in which all human beings are connected by virtue of just being human beings, and states are creations of human beings, but ultimately when violence does happen, it hurts individuals, not the states themselves. So the other part of thinking about it is through a world society. So rather than thinking about it as solidarity, as as the end point of it, we want to think about the world as the homeland of the human race. So if you think about it as the world state, then the focus is at the international level of analysis, and the ideas of revolutionarism and comes into scene, because then the state is not the end point of human expressions or political organization. So some of these ideas for wild society include a much more catalyzed version of the world that is transcends the nation state and that is representative of some of the higher causes already stated in the last slide. So here you get towards what we call cosmopolitanism. You remember the article we read from Baba about jihadism versus Markwaldism, the Mark world. Here, the Kantian seems to be more aligned toward the Mark world in the pursuit of a cosmopolitan world, almost a world state, where the absence of government is replaced by greatly shared norms that safeguard and inform state actions at the global level. So, how does the international society framework or the English school framework works? International society does not allow states to escape from anarchy, but to manage it effectively. So they are in sync with the idea that while the international village, as I like to call it, is one that is structurally anarchic, it doesn't mean that cooperative frameworks cannot exist. That we can create multiple societies within. So you can have a society of democracy. So one way of thinking about it is the European Union as an example of an international society with constitutive members who agree on a certain framework or normative framework that they want to live with, and they invite members based on their ability to conform to those values. And you could also say an alliance of authoritarian regime is also a society that challenges the values, perhaps, that are espoused by the European Union and its members. So many of this reasoning says the multiplicities of society, while very present, does not diminish the idea of the existence of a much higher human society. So the normative frameworks are important, and the norms that members of society espouse shape the possibility of peace even within anarchy. So when you do have a lot of authoritarian regimes, you might likely to end with extreme nationalism and extreme wars, sort of like the First World War and the Second World War. But at the second time, if you do have a lot of democratic norms and democratic values, you tend to have more peace, as we have seen since 1945. So both are true, and both can be challenged as well. So what do they preach as means of governance for the global order? They preach diplomacy. So diplomacy are activities that states undertake to manage relations abroad. Diplomatic efforts include, but that's not the end of it, like acquiring information and conducting investigations before a decision is made by the state. They include deal making. They include channeling ways of navigating challenges to avoid conflict. They also encourage interaction through permanent representations in foreign states that they might like or they might not like, but I do think that revoking diplomatic representation is a signal that war making is near. They also think hard about diplomatic immunity, which means for English scholars, an ambassador representing another country should not be tried for crimes while conducting business on behalf of their country. What this means is if an ambassador of Russia is in the United States, I'm not sure if they have one right now, but if there was one, then he commits a crime or she commits a crime, then the United States cannot try, even if it's a crime that breaks the law of the United States. They will ask the Russians to recall them and try them in their land. The whole idea here is the ambassador is the representation of the collective of that state and the presidency, and they do not want to be embarrassed. And if countries start doing that all over the world, all of a sudden we have a catastrophe, a situation that can easily escalate into violence. This is not historically inaccurate. If you explore some of the causes of the First World War, you're going to realize it's some diplomatic problems that escalated the conflict and made it impossible to solve in short time. In addition to formal diplomatic engagements, they talk about back channel diplomacy. So sometimes governments can be talking to frenemies or enemy states without the public knowing until such a time when there are agreements on how to move forward, then they will make it public. So back channel diplomatic relations. The famous guys known for this kind of work in the Middle East are the Qataris. The Qataris are known to be back diplomatic channel conduits for many of the conflicts that are happening in the Middle East with the many militias and countries that don't get along, because the Qataris like to be neutral. So everybody, if you have beef with somebody, you call the Qataris. They probably have diplomatic channels that can help you talk. So in the release of hostages between Hamas and Palestine, Hamas and the Israeli defense forces, Qataris have been involved quite a bit. But in addition to that, as a way of peace, they also think about traditions. So it's interesting when you think about international law, mostly it's just a series of traditions and practices that states respect. So since the English school is a study of diplomatic history and mostly is very Euro-centered in that it studies the practices of peace between European actors. One of those practices is traditions. So you do not disavow the tradition. You do not disrespect this tradition. You follow them. You follow them by, for example, if a foreign government visits, they have to be, if it's a state visit, then they have to be welcomed into the country by their equal. So if, let's say, the president of Bahamas or prime minister of Bahamas is coming into the United States, at some point, the president of the United States or the vice president should be meeting them and welcoming them to the country. They cannot send somebody lower, because that is a breach of traditions of foreign policy. And the Bahamians, although a small country, they can take offense. And if it's a big country, they will think it's an insult. Or even the Bahamian, as a small country, they'll still think it's an insult because it's a breach of diplomatic tradition. So let's think about so that was the peaceful ways that they solve problem. Let's think about how they solve problem aggressively. They could do that through power balancing. And power balancing means the efforts of states to protect themselves in an anarchical world by arraying power against power. So arranging power against power. So what this means is, one way to think about it is the European history after 1840s, in which Napoleonic France was riding and created a lot of wars in continental Europe. And Britain, as an island nation, felt, well, these French are kind of rising real fast. Let's do something to prevent the French from taking over as the hegemon, bona fide hegemon of continental Europe. So, okay, we're going to balance their power. So we're going to make a series of alliances with other countries to counter the French. And that led to what we create, the creation of what is called the concert of Europe. This ability that no country could be allowed, the process in which, a phenomena in which no country in Europe at this time was allowed to be militarily superior than the other. If one was superior, they will be balanced by shifting relations, so there is parity, so that will avoid war, because if you attack, the other one will be defended, and there's some sort of balance. So this balance can be regional, but it can also be state-driven. If it is state-driven, it means this country is mobilizing domestic ability, military, naval powers, or economy in pursuit of military or capabilities that are higher than other countries that are threatening them. But it can also be pursued by making alliances for small actors in order to diffuse potential threats in the region. Okay, now we are not going to do that group activity since we are not in class, so I'm going to end it here. But I just wanted to introduce you to the idea of the English school, also called the international society framework of thinking about international relations and international politics. Now, as you study and as you get enlightened about other theories and frameworks in international politics, consider the English school as a potential way of thinking about some of the challenges we have faced in the past and we are facing today. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.